Beep, beep, toot, toot. Hey, good people, how are you this evening? It's your Alabama church girl here. First, giving honor to God, who is the head of my life. To all the leaders, saints, and friends, grab your books. Grab your books now and hurry up. Tell a friend to hurry up. Get on in here. It's time. I have been waiting, anticipating the moment to read this book with you. And this evening, the night has finally come. I'm so excited. Confetti. It's our kind of people. Our kind of people. Grab your books. Go ahead and grab your books. If you don't have your book, it's okay. But I want you to go ahead and drop down in the comment section. I do have the Amazon link where you can go and get your book. They're relatively inexpensive. So go ahead and get your book, or you can go to your local library. Hopefully, they still have them in the library. I actually got this one used off of Amazon, and it came from a library. Y'all, when the media tells us that they are really trying to get rid of Black history in the schools, honey, this book, do y'all see that on that front page? It came from a high school. And do you see what's stamped in bold? Discard. Get rid of it. So, anywho, I'm glad they did. And I went ahead and got mine. And I'm imploring you to go ahead and get yours so we can read this book together. Our Kind of People. The book is written by Lawrence Aldous Graham. I want you to go ahead and grab your books. Tell your friend to come on over in here so we can have this read along on this evening. Now, listen. My intention as the Alabama church girl is always to challenge the mindset, the oppressed mentality, and the misguided behaviors of the Black community as well as the Black church, specifically the Black church. Um, that's my interest. I'm a church girl, always have been, always will be. So, with that being stated, why are we reading this book, Our Kind of People? Because it gives us so many insights, so much detail that we cannot ignore about our own behavior, our misguided behavior amongst our community. Of course, the Black church is made of the Black community. And this book here actually outlines how we divide ourselves. In the intro, you saw the statement where the Pharisees were trying to basically demonize Jesus for being a spiritual person, doing all of his alchemy and healing, and say that he must be, it's got to be witchcraft, it's got to be demonic, that he is out here casting out devils. Okay, and Jesus said, listen, I if I was a devil, there would be no way that I could cast myself out. You know why? Because a divided house cannot stand. A divided house or a divided city cannot stand against itself. So I want us as a community to really ask ourselves, why do we continue to divide ourselves? We know that division has already been set in place in the US of A, amongst um, us and the general population at large. The Black people are scrutinized the heaviest as a race of people. I don't have to go into too many details for you to understand where I'm going with this. So, if we are out here solo dolo, like this thumb, away from the rest of the fingers in the community, why would we want to pick apart the thumb itself and make it become the weakest link? Why? Why would we want to do that to ourselves? Yet that's what we're doing to ourselves. Our kind of people, our kind of people gives us insight into the boule, into the elite Black, those who are considered the talented 10 of our community, the top talented 10 of our community. This book gives us insight into how this came about, how it is, how it functions in our community. And honestly, from my perspective, because I'm not a part of this elite community, from my perspective, it does us more damage than it does good. I'm very close and familiar with the community, but I do not consider myself a part. Okay. All right. So with that being stated, have you all gone over? Have you seen the news on today? Today, Bravo dropped its trailer for the new season of Real Housewives of Potomac, season number 8. Have y'all seen that trailer yet? It's something, baby. It's something. It seems like the show is going to be good. I know that if you are a part of this elite Black community, you're probably saying to yourself, "I don't watch that type of TV," but I do. And those of you who do too, you know what the Real Housewives of Potomac is giving our kind of people. And that's why I do watch those types of shows, because for me, it's just a peek into it's almost like a social experiment that I watch it for, to see if once you put this group of people together, how are they going to interact with one another. And for years, if you have been watching the Real Housewives of Potomac, then you know that there's a elephant in the room that is always brought up at the reunion, that Real Housewives of Potomac has a colorism problem that they don't want to deal with. They don't want to discuss it. Well, our kind of people outlines why they don't. It's unwritten rules in our community. The rules are there. That's how you know that this is a social construct. Being superior to one another, that's a social construct. Um, I had the opportunity to go to Boston for my birthday this year, just a couple months ago. I think I shared a little bit with you in previous videos about my trip to Boston, but I'm going to share with you a little more about what I learned there and about the communities there, because I didn't know until I visited. Let me back up a little bit and let you know that everywhere I go, I'm in search of Black history. That's just my thing. That's what I love. I don't care that you call me a nerd. I am who I am. I am that I am. But in my exploration for Black history in Boston, I did not know this until I got there a couple of months ago, that Massachusetts was the first state to actually free enslaved people. I did not know that. Well, in learning so, I also learned the backstory and honestly how these elite communities within the Black communities came to be. And it goes right back to where? Church. Because church is foundation of just about everything in the United States. Because why? The United States, those who came and settled in those first 13 territories, they were leaving England because they were mad at the church. So everything that happens in community, no matter what community you're a part of in the United States, has a relevance back to church. All right. Anywho, so I was in Boston, and they began to teach us and tell us what I can't remember the name of the particular museum that I was at. But anywho, they began to teach us and tell us about how the Puritans were in that area, which is so problematic. So problematic. Boston, Massachusetts, which is right next to Salem, Massachusetts, the Salem witch trials. If you know anything about this history, you know where I'm going with this. Where if you were not a Puritan, if you were not the Puritans and the Protestants that went to particular churches, you sat in specific areas, you sat in a certain manner. The seats were very small, very straight up, and you had to have certain mannerisms to participate in that church. If you missed a Sunday in church, you were deemed a little bit dirty and unsanctimonious. You were really scrutinized in the community if you did not uphold the rules of the Puritan and Protestant churches. Excuse me. Just so you know, these people worked hard to prove that they were pure, perfect, above, that they were hard workers who deserved the goodness of life. Yeah, they also had owned enslaved people. So, anywho, with all this being stated, whenever blacks were freed from enslavement in Massachusetts during this time, a lot of them had been participating in these churches. Now, as enslaved people, even as free black people, their participation in these churches was still separate from those Englishmen that were participating and women that were participating in these churches. They had to sit up in the on the second floor away from them because they did not want these Englishmen did not want these enslaved people in the sanctuary with them or sitting next to them. They wanted to prove that they were the elite of the society. These are the people that would promote patriarchy to a point of, if a woman didn't obey, or if she did not have the appropriate humbleness in her attitude, she could be deemed a witch and be set on fire. Salem witch trials. Y'all go and study the history. Anywho, I'm bringing all that up because all of that actually snowballs into where we are in our kind of people. The practices of slave owners have been captured, contained, and enacted in our own community. And I don't understand. Why would we want to be like them? Why would we want to act out like them? Here's my second disclaimer this evening. I am going to take my time with this book because it is such a good book. It's such a good read. It's worth the patience in our reading. This is not one that you just want to speed read through and say, okay, I did that, that's done. No, 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 no. You need to take in every word as you're reading this book because it is so relative to how we operate in our daily lives right here, right now in 2023, moving into 2024. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but back to the Real Housewives of Potomac. There is this situation where you see the cast is divided by color lines, by who's bright skin, fair eyes, fine hair versus who's not, who's tan or brown, like this girl right here, like the Alabama church girl. I know that plenty of us have dealt with colorism, not racism, but colorism within our own community. That colorism word, if you don't know the definition, basically, in simple layman's terms, colorism is a preference in preferential treatment to one person who is lighter skinned than versus the other who is darker skinned. A colorism issue. Um, there are plenty of us. I will testify personally, and I have testified personally on this channel before, so it's nothing new. How my grandmother was a colorist, and my grandmother was darker than me. But she was beautiful nonetheless, had beautiful skin that glowed with that little shininess like I have, just like me. But but she was darker than me, but she had an issue with her own complexion as well as mine. She did favor the cousins that were lighter skinned. So, not we've all, I will say the most of us have experienced colorism within our own individual lives. So, that's something that is going to be brought up. That's one of the issues that is brought up in this book. I won't delay. I won't tarry any longer. So we're getting into our kind of people. This is a read along. So if you do have your book, I would love for you to go ahead and grab it. Let's read along. Our kind of people. The author is Lawrence Otis Graham. This book was published in 1999. There's also a show that was modeled after this book called Our Kind of People. I think it came out in 2021. I think it has been canceled since then, but you can go and stream it. It is on streaming services. Let me see here. Let me show you the graphics. So if you are interested in it, you can go and search it. I know it's on Hulu. I'm not sure what other streaming services it's on. But this is the graphic here. All right. If it wants to pop up. Okay. Anywho, so Our Kind of People. Let's get into it. Published in 1999. The author is Lawrence Otis Graham. He's also the narrator of this story. He is a member of this elite Black community. So we're not talking about someone who is just discussing what they assume of this community. This is someone who is a member of the community, so has firsthand knowledge and experience to speak about within this community. So let's get into it. I did let you know. Did I tell you? Other disclaimer for the evening. I don't know which number we're on, but this book does use the N word frequently. If you know anything about me, I don't usually use that word unless it's in quotation. So please know I am going to read the book as it is written, but that's not my usual manner of speaking. Okay. All right. So let's get into it. Okay. Starting at chapter 1, the origins of the Black upper class. All right. So let me get comfortable because this is good, baby. This is good. All right. So Bryant Gumbel is, but Bill Cosby isn't. Lena Horne is, but Whitney Houston isn't. Andrew Young is, but Jesse Jackson isn't. And neither is Maya Angelou, Alice Walker, Clarence Thomas, or Quincy Jones. And even though both of them try extremely hard, neither Diana Ross nor Robin Givens will ever be. All my life, as long as I can remember, I grew up thinking that there existed only two types of Black people: those who passed the brown paper bag and ruler test, and those who didn't. Those who were members of the Black elite and those who weren't. I recall summertime visits from my maternal great-grandmother, a well-educated, light-complexioned, straight-haired, Black Southern woman who discouraged me and my brother from associating with darker-skinned children or from standing or playing for long periods of time in the July sunlight, which threatened to blacken our already too dark skin. Listen, let me pause right there for a moment because I got a little story. My mother says that there's a story that she used to tell of my older sister when she was a little girl. Now, my older sister says she don't remember anything about this, so I'm just going to tell you what my mama said, okay? I have this uncle who is very dark complected, just like my grandmother. Both of them, like I said, have beautiful skin, but they are darker complected. And my uncle was in the Navy when I was a little girl, when I was born, actually. My mom says he was the one who gave me my name, Valerie, which is a French name. She says that this uncle didn't want me to have ethnic name, so that's why he named me Valerie. But anywho, so my older sister is fairer skinned than me. So my mama tells a story that when my uncle would come home to visit, that my older sister would cry when he held me because she said that, you're gonna make her black. You're gonna make her black. Because she thought that his dark skin was going to rub off on mine. Anywho, here I am, brown and beautiful. Amen. Back to page number 2.
Yes, you are.
Boy, you boys stay out of that terrible sun, great grandmother Porter would say, in a kindly, overprotective tone. God knows you're darker enough already. As she sat rocking, stiff lipped, and humorless on the porch of our Oak Bluffs Martha's Vineyard summer home, she would gesture for us to move further and further into the shade while flipping disgustedly through the pages of Ebony magazine. Here we go, y'all. Here we go. All right, here we go. Here we go. These are words, okay? Niggers, 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 she'd say under her breath while staring at the oversized pages of text and photos of popular Negro politicians, entertainers, and sports figures who were busy making black news in 1968. Great grandmother Porter, the daughter of a minister and homemaker, was extremely proud of her Memphis, Tennessee middle class roots. While still a child, she had worn silk taffeta dresses, had taken several years of piano lessons, and had managed to become fluent in French. Her only daughter had followed her in her footsteps, wearing similarly elegant dresses, taking music classes, and attending the private Lemoyne School a few years ahead of Roberta Church, the millionaire daughter of Robert Church, the richest black man in the South. She often reminded us that one of her sisters, Vinnie, then grown and married, lived for years on the Mississippi Boulevard next door to Maceo Walker, the most affluent, powerful black man in Memphis. Great grandmother was proud of many things, such as being a Republican, like the churches, and most other well placed blacks in those early years. Like all blacks in racist southern towns in the early 1900s, she despised the insults and substandard treatment and the poor facilities that the Jim Crow laws had left for blacks. But, like many blacks of her class, she was able to limit her interactions that she and her family had with such indignities. Ah, did you hear that? One more time for that sentence. Even though she didn't like and really despised how blacks were treated in the Jim Crow South, her class, because she was in a particular class, the divisions, her class of blacks were able to limit the interactions that she and her family had with such indignities. Rather than ride at the back of the bus and send her daughter to substandard segregated public schools, she and her husband bought a car and paid for private schooling. For my great grandmother, life had been generous enough that she could create an environment that buffered her family against the bigotry she knew was just outside her door. Even though it was 1968, a period of unrest for many blacks throughout the country, great grandmother, like the blue veined crowd that she was very proud to belong to, seemed at times to be totally divorced from the black anxiety and misery that we saw on TV news and in the papers. In public and around us children, her remarks often suggested that she was satisfied with the way things were. Now, let's pause for the cause right here. Okay, so I am I don't know how many of you grew up in with black elders with the same mindset, but I can say I'm very familiar. Not only my grandmother and like older people in my family, my mama, very much so. Did not want to fool with any type of political uprisings by blacks. We don't want to would not refuse to talk about anything that happened in the 60s. Let's just get over that and forget it. That type of mindset, like that's not our problem, even though hello, I'm living with it. It's my problem. I cannot avoid the problem when I walk out my doors. No, we do not. That's not what we do. That was the mindset. So, anywho, Okay, where was I? Okay. In the public, okay, I just read that. She often said that she didn't think much of the civil rights movement. I don't see anything civil about being a bunch of nappy headed Negroes screaming and marching around in the streets. Even though I later learned that she and her church friends often gave money to the NAACP, the Urban League, and other groups that fought segregation. You hear this about great grandmother? She don't have respect for the civil rights movement, but I'll throw a check here and there because of course, charity work is good. It looks good for my social groups. Um, she said she didn't think much of Marvin Gaye or Aretha Franklin or their loud Baptist music. When we were going to get beyond all, when are we going to get beyond all this low class Baptist spiritual sounding rock and roll music? Even though she would sometimes attend Baptist services. She was very proud when a black man finally won an Academy Award, but was disappointed that Sidney Poitier seemed so dark and wet with his perspiration when he was interviewed after receiving the honor. Whole lot of judgment going on here. And I want to point out the fact that he brought up her church, that um, she had a disdain for the the loud Baptist spiritual experience. Um, but church is definitely a staple, because just like those Puritans, I can't be presented as elite if I don't do my due diligence and attend the service. This is a problem, black people. And I'm pointing out because this mindset has continued over generations. He Lawrence is speaking of a time in the summer of 1968. But here we are in 2023, going into 2024 now. We're in our final quarter, going into 2024, and we still have black people. And I'm sorry, I got to point out the deficiencies in Alabama. But Alabama, a lot of times, we are the slowest to progress and evolve. We still have this slow mindset, to say the least, that is oppressive to ourselves. It really is, to think um, that our culture and what comes natural, the spirit, the loudness that we come with, has to be shunned. It has to be oppressed. We have to tuck it away. Backwards mindset. And here I am, here to challenge it. Okay. All right. Let's move on. She was okay. An outsider might have looked at this woman and wondered whether she was black at all, if she likes blacks at all. Her views seemed so unforgiving. The fact that she was completely dedicated to the members of her race, but she had a greater understanding and appreciation for those blacks who shared her appearance and socioeconomic background. That sound familiar? Sounds like a racism to me. It sounds like a cousin of racism, that colorism. That, yeah, I like those, but only the ones that look like me. Okay? Disappointed and disillusioned by how little she saw of herself and her crowd in the pages of Ebony magazine, great grandmother looked up and once again focused her attention on me and my brother. And then she thought about her hair, stepping back inside the house for her ever present fuller brush and comb. She was, no doubt, frustrated by the fact that her great grandchildren were several shades darker than she. Sound like my grandma, with kinky hair, and was clearly that Negro person. Okay, so they mentioned the fuller brush. That's a status piece, right? It's no different from a woman just casually mentioning her Chanel bag, or casually mentioning her Louis Vuitton shoes. I went to the ball with my Louis Vuittons, as if they're a whole other person. And I sometimes I ain't knocking nobody for liking nice things because your girl does. But sometimes people wear labels and throw in status pieces as if it's, kind of not virtue signaling, but at least class signaling. I don't care for that. I don't care for that mindset at all. Because, honey, a lot of these pieces that you consider status pieces are from families who used to own families. Okay. And I don't have a respect for that. I really, really don't. That's why you won't see, even if I'm going to wear a nice piece that comes with a label, you're not going to see me with a whole bunch of labels across my chest and, all these logos on me. Because I'm not giving you no promotion, no free promotion on me. No, not unless you're paying me for it. And if I'm not your brand ambassador, then why would I put your brand out like that? Anywho, that's just, the wild hair up my behind. Anywho, so my brother and I noted her disappearance into the house and thus once again ran out of the shade and danced around the sand and the pebble covered road, breathing the sunshine and the fragrance of the dense pine trees that rose from the layers of sand and brush. Young men, her voice called from her rear bedroom. You aren't back in that sun, are you? No, ma'am. We're in the shade, ma'am. My 8-year-old brother Richard called back with complete conviction as he stopped just out of my great grandmother's range of vision, thrusting his bare brown chest and oval face into the 96-degree July sun, boldly willing his skin to glow blacker and blacker in defiance to her query. Even at the age of 6, I knew the importance of class distinctions within my black world. As I moved quickly to safety of the shade, beckoning my brother to protect his complexion from the blackening sun, I gave legitimacy to my great grandmother's and many of my people's fears. At age 6, I already understood the importance of achieving a better shade of black. Back to the question in the intro. Who gave us the authority to make one better than the other? Who? Please tell me who. I do a lot of studying of history. I read a lot of books. I do. And I've been searching for an answer. Who? Who? I understand how we get to this place. That's the authority. I just on that part I don't understand. But this young man, Lawrence, understood it at the age of 6. So this says a lot more to me about this elite and status approach, this class divide, this caste system that we create within our own community, that it does not have to be described. The rules do not have to be written out on a whiteboard. We did not have to go sit down in the Sunday school class and be taught week to week about these rules of the caste system. It is understood in the operations and our behavior from day to day. It is understood by the simple things as a fuller hairbrush and comb set that grandmother adores. These children understand, full understand, the same way that we know racism is understood by children by the age of 6. Moving forward, unlike my brother, I already knew that there was us and there was a them. There were those children who belonged to Jack and Jill and summered in Sag Harbor, Highland Beach, or Oaks Bluffs, Martha's Vineyard. And there were those who didn't. There were those mothers who graduated from Spelman or Fisk or joined AKA, the Deltas, the Links, and the Girlfriends. And there were those who didn't. There were those fathers who were dentists, lawyers, and physicians from Howard, from Meharry, and who were alphas, kappas, or omegas, and members of the comas, the boule, the guardsmen. And there were those who weren't. There were those who could look back 2 or 3 generations and point to the relatives who owned insurance companies, newspapers, funeral homes, local banks, trucking companies, restaurants, catering firms, or farmland. And there were those who couldn't. There were those families that made what some called a handsome picture of people with good hair, quotes in quotes, and in parentheses, wavy or straight, with nice complexions, light brown to nearly white, Robin Dixon, with sharp features, which is a thin nose, thin lips, a sharp jaw, and curiously non-negroid hazel, green, or blue eyes. Mm, mm, mm. And there were those who hadn't, that didn't. I had a precious few of the above, while many I knew and played with were able to check off all the right boxes. In fact, I knew some who not only had complexions 10 shades lighter than that brown paper bag and hair straight as as any ruler, but also had multiple generations of good looks, wealth, accomplishment. And of course, I also knew some black kids who could claim nothing at all. It was a color thing and a class thing. And for generations of black people, color and class have been inexorably tied together. This is so true on so many levels. So true on so many levels. Color and class. All right, since I was born and raised around people with a focus on many of the characteristics, it should be no surprise that I was later to decide at age 26 to have my nose surgically altered just so that I can further buy into the aesthetics biases that many among the black elite held so dear. See, this is why we challenge these crazy mindsets. This young man said, hey, I could check off a lot of these boxes. I was bright skinned. I had some decent hair. It wasn't as fine as my brother's, but I had some decent hair. But it was something else that I didn't have, which is that thin nose. At the age of 26, I went and got my nose job done. I love my wide nose. You know why? Because my grandma gave it to me. Um, he mentioned here, the fair skin next to white and the color of the eyes. Now, I just learned, I've been doing some family history research. Actually, me and my sister and cousin have just gone on a little excursion this summer, this August, searching for family history. And I just learned, I was always told this story of my great great grandfather, who I never met, um, who was biracial. They called him they called him big, but he was little, something to that effect. But that he was passing. He could pass because he had such fair skin and he had blue eyes, but he was definitely a black man. And it's it boggles me how no, it doesn't. I understand. I understand. I don't agree or align with this mindset, but I understand how people could allow the peer pressure of these social constructs to kind of push them out, nudge them over to changing their appearance just so I can fit in. You know, I used to some years back, and if you, it's on social media, it's on these internet streets where hear me discussing on a different channel how I never understood why black women would go and get like butt lifts, butt injections, and stuff like that, or lip injections. Why would we go and do that? That's something that other cultures do to look like us. So why are we going to do that? But I now, as I've gotten older and I learn more, I study more, I study culture more. I understand that there's a mindset amongst us blacks that wants to align with whatever white people think is right. I don't align with it. I don't. Because God has made me good as He has made me whole all on my own. I don't have to. And I thank God for my mother who kept me so sheltered and just refused to allow me to do what all my peers were doing. That I guess it has fortified my mind to know that I don't have to do what my peers are doing. I'm great all by myself. And that means white peers, black peers, Latino peers, I don't have to do what they're doing. I can stand out and be great just as I am, just as God made me and brought me into this earth. So, but like I said, even though I don't align with that mindset, I now understand that there is this desire amongst our own sisters and brothers to want to be like what the privileges of white afford others. So, anywho, this gentleman says, Lawrence says that at the age of 26, he decided, I'm going to go and change my nose so that it could be thin, and I can be in. All right. So, during my youth, it was often painful for me to acknowledge that I had one foot inside and one foot outside of this group. I never quite had enough of the elite credentials to impress the key leaders in the group, but my family and I checked off enough boxes to be embraced by the segment of this community. Sometimes I knew where I was lacking and sometimes I didn't. For example, I knew that my complexion was a shade lighter than the paper brown bag, but that my hair, while not coarse like our African ancestors, had a negroid kink that made it the antithesis of the ruler straight. I knew that we lived in the right neighborhood, summered at the right resorts, and employed the right level of household help, but that we had not attended the right private schools or summer camps. While my grandparents owned businesses and property that brought them and their children an unusually high standard of living, none of them gone none of them had gone to the right schools. My mother was accepted by Old Guard's most exclusive women's social club, but my father belonged to a fraternity that the elite groups considered to be distinctly middle class. My brother and I grew up in the country's most exclusive Black children's group, yet we were never invited to serve as escorts and the best debutante cotillions. But whether it was mainly the skin color, the hair texture, the family background, the education, the money, or the sharpness of the features that set some of us apart and made some of us think we were superior to other blacks. Y'all hear that word? And to most whites, we were certain that we would always be able to recognize our kind of people. Whew, Jesus. Now, you will also hear me if you go back through the catalog of the Alabama Church Girl. Go back to some of my earlier videos, where I really strongly admonish that superiority mindset. I do not agree. I do not agree whether the supremacist mindset. I don't believe anyone is more supreme than the other. The only higher beings are those in the heavens. None of us here on earth can claim that I'm more supreme than you. You might be more accomplished, but you're not more supreme. Excuse me. You might be more decorated, but you're not more supreme. Mm-mm. And even though we have a whole lot of differences amongst us, not one is more supreme than the other. I don't agree or align with that mindset. Now, I will tell you that we love to get out and beat the brow against the white supremacy mindset, but I don't align with black supremacy mindset either. Same thing goes, black people. Why are we wanting to take the art of war from someone else? the characteristics of war from someone else, and use them against our own community. We can't claim that no other man is more supreme than us, and then get out here and say, but we're more supreme than everybody else. No. Do you believe? Are we believing in the same God? I believe there's only one, the creator of us all. And I don't think he made any one of us more supreme than the other. Okay? The same way I want other communities to respect me, I'm going to give respect to other communities. Amen. Hallelujah. All right, off my soapbox and back into this book. The characteristics of the Black elite have roots that can be traced back to almost 400 years when slavery began in this country. When the first Africans arrived on the shores of Jamestown, Virginia in 1619, whether the white, Dutch, or Portuguese slave traders, nor the white American plantation owners had any knowledge of or interest in the tribal and cultural differences between the Mandingo, Dahomian, Ashanti, Bandu, Iwu, Bantu blacks who were brought from different regions of Africa. They had no knowledge or interest in letting the rest of the white America know that these blacks had come from established villages where they were already skilled in crafting iron, gold, leather, silver, and bronze into tools, artwork, household wares, and were where they were already weaving clothing, speaking different languages, growing tomatoes, onions, and fruits, raising livestock, practicing different religions, and establishing laws, banking mechanisms, medical treatments, and various other cultural traditions. The Ivory Coast, Guinea, the Gold Coast, and other areas of West Africa were simply profitable ports of call for the Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, British, and later American slave traders and shippers who captured, dehumanized, raped, and sold more than 15 million men, women, and children on blocks at boat docks up and down the east coast of the United States. To the traders, a sale of at an average price of $500 per man and $250 per woman or child. These South Carolina 1808 prices eventually rose as high as $1,300 or $1,400 by 1860. Now, don't y'all be laughing at me squinting, okay? I'm 40 now. I'm in my 40s and my eyes getting a little okay, but I'm gonna get a surgery to help that part. All right, anywho, so made the business of human bondage profitable, a profitable one that required no conscience and no need to draw cross-cultural connections. All right, so the fact that these people could trade all these different nationalities of Americans, Dutch, British, they could trade these black people off the west coast of Africa for all this and make all this exorbitant amount of money meant that they didn't have to have a conscience. They did not have to eh, um, esteem these people as human. They dehumanized and debased them tremendously so that they didn't have to care. They wouldn't feel the godness that would draw you back. There's something innate in us that lets us know when we're doing something wrong. It's called a conscience, it's called a soul. But if I dehumanize that person, I don't have to have a soul. The same way, oh, I'm about to get over this into some territory here. The same way you can go and slaughter a cow and not know that it might have a soul. I don't have to do that because it's good for me to eat it. You know, woo! I know y'all gonna get on to me. Y'all who love a good steak. It's okay. I'm sorry for getting all in your business. But let me get back over here to reading because that's just my business in the words of Auntie Tab. Okay, prior to 1442, when the Portuguese first arrived in West Africa to capture blacks and began to the 400-year period of black slavery, Africans had their own class distinctions. All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. I want to skip down. Okay, let's go here. The second group of slaves were those who performed more desirable jobs. Oh, no, I can't skip. Okay, let's go back. Prior to 1442, when the Portuguese first arrived in West Africa to capture blacks and began the 400-year period of black slavery, Africans had their own class distinctions and were based on tribe, local, and individual tribal members assigned roles in his community. All these distinctions became moot in the New World. When black slaves arrived on many southern plantations, they were ultimately divided into two general groups. All right, here we go. Here we go. This point is about to bring us up into 2024. Okay? I'm trying to rush through this, but I can't skip, y'all. I can't because there's so much goodness. All right, so um two groups. There were the outside laborers who worked in the fields harvesting rice or tobacco, cutting sugarcane, picking cotton, or building roads and structures. Included amongst this outside laborer group was those slaves who worked at smelting iron, digging wells, and laying bricks. So these have to be some people of some type of intellect because you don't just learn how to dig ditches and put up wells. You don't learn how to just work with iron without setting your soul on fire. You don't just know that without having some type of skill and intellect. Okay. Even I went to the Whitley plantation in Louisiana, and they showed us how the enslaved people there were used to make sugar. And that's a process that you have to have a certain level of skill and intellect to do without actually killing yourself in the fire. Do you know how hot sugar gets? How much heat sugar will hold? Have you ever baked a caramel cake and you put that all that sugar in that pan in that pot and you have to put it in the you have to boil that hot water to keep it from sticking? Baby, this was a process. This takes, even though they were outside laborers, they were outdoor laborers, they had to have some sort of skill and intellect. But because we're going to get to it, they were not considered as such a much. Many slaves built the very plantations and the buildings around which they worked. Okay. Thomas Jefferson's Monticello and George Washington's Mount Vernon were both important homes built by slaves. In the words of Angela Rye, we built this country for free. Um, and the most and for the most part, throughout the South, these outside laborers lived in windowless, unfloored shacks or in structures close to their owners' livestock. Skilled laborers being housed with the animals, close to the animals, and housed like the animals. All right, so the second group of slaves were those who performed the more desirable jobs inside the master's house: cooking, cleaning, washing, and tending to the more personal needs of the owner's family around the home. Now, for all of you red pill men out there, cooking, cleaning, washing, and tending to personal needs has never been esteemed high since I've been living in this world. People tend to think that a woman who stays home and cooks and cleans and washes is not deserving of anything in a divorce. So I don't know why this second group, I do. I'm just saying this rhetorically. This second group of enslaved people, now all of them are enslaved. Let's keep this in mind. Every single one of them have been degraded and debased into slavery. But some are skilled laborers who work outside. And then there are those who have been introduced and invited inside the master's home to cook, clean, and wash and tend to their personal needs. Those personal needs Also included their bedroom time. All right, so while these laborers were also slaves, with no more or fewer rights than the outdoor workers, the distinctions between the slaves in the field and the slaves who served as butlers and mammies in the house were not all subtle. The terms house niggers and field niggers grew into meaningful labels as generations of slaves in the master's house gained more favorable treatment and had access to better food, better working conditions, better clothing, and a level of intimacy with the owner's family that introduced the house slave to white ways, minimal education, and non-consensual sexual relations. Do I need to say that again, or did you hear me the first time? The house, in words, had more favorable treatment by the master, better food, better working conditions, better clothing, and another level of intimacy into their life. I'm wanting to pause for the cause because is this where Black people began to acquiesce to the white supremacy mindset? It's just a question. Let's pause for this mindset moment. Is this where? Is this how we began to buy in and think that what's white has to be right? That I need to do what they do and act like they act and look like they look and wear what they wear because that must be right. Now, mind you, what is considered white right now is not the way it was. Not white was never a consideration back in the early 1800s. It was not. It was, as you heard him break down, the Portuguese, the British, the Dutch. It was different distinctions of non-melanated people coming from different countries. There is no, white is a social construct. So even that mindset of I got to do what they do, how they do, honey, they didn't know who they were. They were trying to be somebody and go somewhere. They didn't have it together. They were fighting amongst each other on that same race to be supreme. Did Jesus tell us about that? Do we even read our Bible for real? Because there's a story in there that supposedly Jesus's disciples were trying to race to see who was going to sit next to him in glory. And Jesus told them that ain't what we're doing. What? Nobody's going to sit next to me. The fact that the one thing that you need to be doing is just make sure you get in. Okay? Just make sure you're good, people. One is not going to be better ever. Just make sure you good, okay? All right, anywho. As the caste system among the slaves was gradually instituted by the slave owners, instituted by, as Dr. Greg Carr always tells us, that individuals don't be institutions. This is an institution. This caste system is an institution. Now, we can change it, but it was instituted by the slave owners and their families. The slaves themselves came to believe that one group was indeed superior to the other. They believed. They bought into it. So this answers my question. Did we acquiesce to that white supremacy mindset? Yes, these slaves did. They began to believe what was instituted by the slave owners and their families, that one of these Black people was more supreme than the other. The plantation owners began to place their lighter skinned slaves in the house, thus creating an even greater chasm between the two groups. Now, based on the physical characteristics, do y'all remember Jane Elliott's experiment of brown eyes versus blue eyes? If you don't, go and check that out. It's here on YouTube, where she does an experiment to see if I treat college students that had brown eyes differently from I treated the ones that have blue eyes, how would they treat each other? If I gave one preferential treatment and donned and esteemed them to be better, how would they treat one another? And just as her experiment was set out, it proved that nothing else had to be said. They began to fight just based off the distinction that one was more preferred than the other. A divided house cannot stand. A divided house cannot stand. Black community, do you hear me? A divided house cannot stand. The caste system instituted by the slave owners is dividing us, and a divided house cannot stand. I have been blowing the horn that Boule mentality, not just the organization itself, but the Boule mentality is problematic. It's problematic, Black people, because if you are not aware, the raw is against us. We are all in the raw. And if we're divided against each other, how can we stand like Ukraine? A divided house cannot stand. Back to the book. Back to the book I go. Okay, now based on their physical characteristics, not just a random assignment. Because these lighter skinned blacks were perceived as receiving greater benefits and more comfortable lifestyle, resentment among darker skinned field slaves only grew. Although it was illegal to educate slaves, explains history professor Dr. Adele Logan Alexander of George Washington University, it was far more likely that the house slave would learn to read, be introduced to upper class white traditions, and be permitted to play or interact with white family members than would the field slave. In fact, slave owning families found that they could run their homes more efficiently when their house slaves were more knowledgeable and educated. All right, so here comes another shift. You ever felt like that well paying elite corporate job that you went and gained at least 2 or 3 degrees to attain this job? Have you ever felt like that elite job owned you? You don't have no life outside from your job. Your life is your career. Your career is your life. Family, what is that? Who are those people? They're just individuals in the same house with me. But I live for my paycheck. Let me read this sentence to you again if you've ever felt like that. Slave owning families found that they could run their homes more efficiently when their house slaves, still slaves, although you're considered the elite, is still a slave, were more knowledgeable and educated. Does it ring any bells? Where's my bell? Y'all like my pretty little bell? Hello, Black people, wake up. You're still a slave. You're still a slave to the job. You're still a slave to the paycheck. You're still a slave to that institution of the caste system. You don't get to determine how you're going to spend that money because they have determined it for you, that if you don't pay these fees, you can no longer be a part of this system. If you don't participate, if you don't show up and bring your child like we told you to, we're going to cast you out of this caste system. I don't care that you are classy enough. You, as Funky Dineva said, you classy based. I don't care. You can be classy based outside of the parameters of what we consider elite. All right, so anywho, back to the book. Not despisingly, both whites and house niggers came to consider the dark skinned field niggers to be less civilized and intellectually inferior. Now, I just pointed out to you the jobs that they said that they explained the outside laborers were performing. Those are high skilled jobs. In fact, in today's society, those are the jobs that would not have you as somebody's employee, not unless you just wanted to be, but those are the ones that will have you as the entrepreneurs. I can dig ditches and build wells and cause water to come up into your household. I can build homes, build schools, take care of livestock, plant food, the necessities of life. Those are highly skilled positions. But because they were darker skinned and they were outdoors, and we placed them next to the livestock, we will now place upon them a label that says that they are less civilized because they're out there outside. They're in the ghetto. They live outside the gates. They're less civilized. And they're intellectually inferior. Really? When all you were inside doing was washing and cooking and cleaning? Oh, okay. Since many white slave owners, and all that you have learned is what the slave owner was willing to teach you. All right, so let me just get off my high horse, baby. Since many white slave owners established clandestine and forced sexual relationships with their female house slaves, the mulatto offspring were also assigned slave status, extended the size of the house slave staff. In fact, it was to the owner's benefit to mate with many of these female slaves as possible, for each new child was a new slave. See how he's benefiting off of you over and over and over again. Whether it's a financial benefit, whether it's a household benefit, whether it's a sexual benefit, I get to benefit off of you over and over and over again. While none of these illegitimate offspring had any more rights than their unmixed African slaves, that you no more legitimate than that child that was born out there in the fields. And you don't have any more rights than that child that was born out there in the field. Only difference is I'll give you a few privileges. They became a part of the growing phenomenon of lighter complexion house slaves who separated themselves even further from the field blacks. It is evident that the fixation on skin color by both upper class whites and blacks derives from the fact that light-skinned blacks were given a favored status by white slave owners from their very early interaction during the slave period, explains Professor Alexander. In her book, Ambiguous Lives, Alexander explores her own family's roots in Georgia as free, light skinned blacks in the 18th century and 19th centuries. The phenomenon was not limited to Southern blacks, although the South was the most notorious for its use of slaves. Blacks were owned and used as slaves in northern states well into the 1800s. For example, although Pennsylvania was the first state to establish a law abolishing slavery, I see Massachusetts told me that they were, with its 1780 Act of gradual abolition of slavery, the weak terms of the act allowed some blacks to remain enslaved until 1850. So maybe this is the distinction. When the federal census ultimately found no slaves living in the state. Over time, then, the caste system took on third dimension. Free blacks versus enslaved blacks. And this is what I was explaining at the beginning, discussing that what I learned in Boston. For example, in Pennsylvania, the federal census of 1790 reveals that of the 10,274 blacks living in the state, more than one third of them were slaves, with the remaining group labeled as free blacks or free people of color. There were many arguments used by white government officials, religious leaders, and highly esteemed landowners to justify the continued enslavement of blacks in North America, just as they had done when attempting to enslave the Native Americans. Now, something else that I learned was the story of Sasquatch. Let me make sure I got the name right. Um, Squanto. I'm sorry, I got the Native American Squanto. Let me tell you about the story of Squanto. Squanto was basically a leader in his own community of the Native Americans. When Englishmen came to, well, this was in 1620, Englishmen came into the area where Squanto and his people, the territory where his people lived. And they basically took over the land. They wanted to own it, and they basically took it over. They call those people barbaric in their justification of taking over the land. They kidnapped this leader named Squanto to learn, so that they made him feel like he was superior. These tactics, y'all, this is the art of war. This is the art of war. These tactics haven't changed. The playbook has not changed. What they did, they made this particular man, who they saw as the leader of these people, feel like he was more superior. So they puffed his head up to let him know that, hey, we like you better than we like them. Come teach us, because you're so knowledgeable, and you're so great, and you're so grand, and we'll let you wear our clothes, and you can come live with us in England. In fact, they did take him over to England, took him to England. While he was there, he taught them how they survived in the territory, because remember, when English people first came into this territory we call now the United States, they were dying in mass droves because they were catching these diseases that they didn't know how to fight off, because they were not familiar with the territory. They didn't know the climate. They didn't know the terrain. They didn't know how to survive here. So how did they learn? They took one of the leaders of the Native Americans who did know. They basically gleaned his culture from him, and then threw him back to the wolves. They took him to England. Like I said, he taught them how to survive in their territory, and then they came back and took over the territory. And the story is literally history. If you don't believe me, go study the Thanksgiving history, as we are fast approaching November. Well, this is the same type of mentality, same type of art of war that is being enacted upon us Black people. We let folk in, teach them our culture. They make us feel like we're grand and we're great because we taught them our culture, and then they throw us to the wolves, like discarded, and you can't come back to your own people, because you were you can not considered a traitor. You committed treason against your own people. Anywho, y'all, let me stay off this soapbox. Can you help me stay off this soapbox, please? Drop down in the comments and say, get off your soapbox, girl, and keep reading. Because I'm really trying to get finished. But I keep having to stop and pause for the calls and give y'all the stories and all. Because it's just so good to me. This book is so good to me. Uh-oh. I'm trying to get over here to make sure we ain't missing. All right. So, back to the book. All right. Just as they had done in attempting to enslave the Native Americans, the white population insisted that Africans should be enslaved because they were not Christians. All right, for the saints who say that this is a white man's religion, this is your part right here. And as long as they did not embrace such religious tenets, they needed to be ruled and civilized by the whites who did. I didn't write this book, Lawrence did. I know the history, but it's a lot of black folk in church who don't want to believe that this is what it is. I didn't write it, Lawrence did. But I believe it and I'm going to keep reading. All right, so upon the conversation of some of the blacks to Christianity, and after a certain number of years of indentured servitude, a very small percentage of slaves were set free, thus creating a population of free blacks in North America. This practice of freeing slaves was sporadic and was ultimately halted in the South. In fact, it was as early as 1660s in Virginia that blacks would legally be made slaves in perpetuity. Many whites, landowners, and government officials elsewhere quickly came to agree with the decision as they realized how much the economics of the communities had benefited from free labor. While their numbers were inconsequential, free blacks in the South became an elite group with a status somewhere between their enslaved brethren and white citizens. This Houston, we have a problem. For example, in the state of Georgia in 1800, there were 1,019 free blacks. By 1860, the number had grown only to 3,500 free blacks. In the city of Charleston, South Carolina in 1860, out of a population of 40,522 people, close to 14,000 were black slaves and only 3,200 were free blacks. Now right here, is where we get this Karen mentality of you got to identify yourself to me. Free blacks in the South were generally required to carry papers proving that they were not slaves. Even if they had them, a lot of times they were detained by the local officials called the police and were required to register annually in their counties, listing their white guardians. Now, did you hear the inconsistency in that sentence? Free blacks. What does free mean? Free means Jesus paid the price, right? Jesus paid it all, right? Free. But by the time we get to the end of the sentence, it says listing their white guardians. If I'm free, ain't nobody got a guardian on me. I got angels watching over me. You see the inconsistency? That black people ain't never been considered free in this country. Show me your papers. You see where this mindset, let's pause for this mindset moment. Whew. Do you see? Do you see? Do you see how this mindset has traveled several generations of show me your papers. I can stop you if I want to and verify that you're supposed to be here. Show me your papers and let me find out who's your guardian, i.e., who you work for, who's your employer. I'm just saying. However, they were permitted to work for money. They were permitted to work for money and to own property, thus creating this first opportunity for blacks to establish their families with some moderate wealth. The nucleus of the black elite was formed around these families. One of the first encounters with an early pioneering family in the black upper class was meeting members of the aristocratic Syphax family in Virginia. I had grown up hearing my father tell me about their family history, as one of his father's business associates had known several family members. Talking to Evelyn Reed Syphax at a Links meeting that my mother had brought me to, I learned one way in which some Black families, including her own, gain wealth and a place among the upper class. This is what Miss Syphax is telling Lawrence, this little boy who just happened to go to the Links meeting with his mama. My family had owned 15 acres of land where the Arlington National Cemetery is now. Syphax explained as she recounted the history of her family, which can be traced back to Maria Custis, the mulatto child of the First Lady Martha Washington's grandson, George Washington Parke Custis, who owned the mansion and sits on the cemetery today. Do y'all know what the Arlington National Cemetery is? This is where presidents are buried, okay? That's a big deal. Custis fathered Maria and Ariana Carter, one of his female with his one of his female house slaves. Custis, who is the grandson of George Washington, fathered two children, Maria and Ariana Carter, with one of his house slaves, explained Syphax, a well to do retired real estate broker who lives in Virginia. And when Maria asked her father, who was also still her father was her owner. Y'all know what that means. She was still a slave, but she asked her father for permission to marry Charles Syphax, a Black slave who worked for her father. He released both from slavery, gave her a wedding in the mansion, and offered her and her new husband 15 acres of the Arlington estate. That mansion and the surrounding properties, minus Maria Syphax's 15 acres, was later given to Custis, was later given by Custis to his white daughter, Mary Custis, who eventually married the Confederate soldier Robert E. Lee. Y'all know who that is. The high school named after him. The general, thus making the house a famous building in the South State. So he had two children that he fathered with one of his house slaves. He still, remember, we just read over on the other page that even though these slave owners would have children with their indoor house Negroes, I can't keep saying that word, y'all. Those children were still considered slaves. They just added to the stacks and racks in the slave owner's bank account. Yes, they were his children. And yes, they had some benefits of being his children. But any given time, if the white child of his wanted something, they were going to get it because they absolutely were the preferred. I'm just saying. I'm just pointing out the facts. On my first trip to Washington, with my family in the late 1960s, I remember my parents remarking that the Syphax story was evidence that the Black family's genealogy could be as relevant as the country's history as any white families that I might read about in school. Okay. All right, let me get down here. College education has made it possible for Blacks around that time, around the time of the Civil War, by the generosity of religious groups. All right, here we go, college, because we think in today's society, having a college education, if within the Black community, is esteemed as though that makes you higher and more respected. And, to a certain degree, I get it. But because, yes, you spend a lot of time gaining an education. But I cannot get with, I'm going to respect one more than I respect another. Because not just because someone goes to college does not make them, first of all, intelligent. Baby, I've been to 3 colleges. Don't make you intelligent just because you went to college. And 2, it does not make people better. I cannot tell you, now that I work where I work and how I work in human resources. I cannot tell you in my profession how many of it's the college educated ones that are constantly getting in trouble for dealing in substances that they shouldn't avoid. It's the college educated ones that are constantly doing stuff that's above and beyond. I'm just saying, just because you go to college does not necessarily make you a more superior mind, okay? Because intellect is more than just the education that is taught to you. Amen. Hallelujah. Um, but education, college education for blacks around that time was given out of generosity from religious groups like the American Missionary Association, an association of liberal whites who had initially opened elementary schools for blacks in the South before the war. As the abolitionist group raised funds in the North and attract Northern white and black teachers to the South in the 1860s, they established secondary schools and colleges like Fisk University in Nashville, Hampton Institute in Virginia, Tugelo College in Mississippi, and many other universities that exist today. By 1865, an American Missionary Association had recruited more than 300 teachers to its black Southern schools. Another group that made it possible for blacks to receive formal education at this time was the Freedmen's Aid Society, which was established by the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1866. Everything in black community, in most communities, but I specifically talk about the black community. Everything in the black community centers around that church. I'm telling you, okay? That's why it's important to pay attention to this Alabama church girl. By the 1870s, not even a decade beyond slavery, handfuls of blacks were breaking into their own middle class and attending the earliest establishments of black colleges like Howard University, Fisk University, Atlanta University, Morehouse College, all founded in the 1860s, and later Spelman College, founded in the 1880s for black women. Not coincidentally, these are among the 6 or 7 schools that our old guard black elite still consider to be most appropriate for their children today. I am a witness. I've told y'all plenty of times before about my story about going to Tuskegee University. My mother, I had a full scholarship to the University of Alabama. I actually was going to go with 3 other of my classmates who were all in the honor society as well, black females. We were all going to go together. And although we were friends in school, I didn't consider them that close. So I felt apprehension about getting an apartment with them because I have always been a loner, y'all. I'm sorry. I have. But anywho, I did not go, and my economics teacher kept telling me that I should consider HBCU. Kept telling me that. Kept telling me I should consider Tuskegee. He just was very adamant that I was a classy girl and I would love Tuskegee, and I was just like, oh, y'all. I went to a predominantly at that time. My high school was predominantly white, and honestly. My mindset was predominantly white as well, and it played more into, like I said, this type of mentality that I was surrounded by. Anywho, but I had my chemistry teacher had submitted my name for a scholarship, and I did not know it. I had a 99 average in her class, and I didn't even like this teacher. So I felt like she was mean. I just wanted to go in her. I liked her class because I liked science, but and I think I took her for chemistry, and I had physics next door with another teacher. But I took her for something. I took her for 2 classes, but anywho, she had submitted my name for a scholarship, and I got it. The professor, the science professor, kept calling the house. He was talking to my mom like almost every night. It was almost like, we gonna make sure she gets here. And he did. I did. I went to Tuskegee University because My mother, at the last minute, she forced me, hey, you're not going to Alabama, you're going to Tuskegee, because she felt like that was an elite school where I belonged, you know. And I, at the time, I was so green in the mind, so naive because I was so sheltered. I didn't have a point of reference to know what was elite and what was not. I told you when I got to Tuskegee, it was a lot that I found out that I didn't know about life, because I didn't know, first of all, that black folks was this rich, rich. I didn't know that. I was like, oh, okay. Although I was smart and smart enough to be there, and I was cute too. I was still, my mom was a nurse, so she did okay. But she would have been considered, her and my daddy would have been considered the field. You know what I mean? Anywho, just to let you know, that mindset still exists. That yes, these are the schools that you go to. All of our children, all of me and my first cousins, our children are now all going to HBCUs. But we have expanded and broadened our horizons when it comes to those HBCUs. Praise God. Specifically, not included are dozens of other black schools like Alabama State, who my son goes to Alabama State, and Tugelo College, because they were state sponsored or populated by poorer students from the Deep South. There are also examples of blacks attending white northern schools. Okay, this is a lot about schools. All right. So it goes on. I'm trying to skip through because y'all, I don't want to just belabor the time, but the book is good. I don't want to. I really don't want to skip, but let me try to paraphrase some of this for you. So it talks about not only having an elite mindset when it comes to what particular school you go to. It also talks about having this elite mindset of if you have family members that participate in politics, do you come from a family of politicians? Do y'all remember on the Real Housewives of Potomac? I think it was one of the first reunions, either number one or number two, when Giselle Bryant made the statement, well, I have a pedigree. Yeah, this is what she was referring to. First of all, she passes the brown paper bag test. Yes, she does have the green eyes. Yes, she does have the thin nose, thin lips, all the things. She checks off all of those boxes. But she also says, I have a pedigree, because her dad was a politician. She went to one of these particular schools. So yes, this is what she was meaning. Yes, she participates in this our kind of people elite group. Her dad checks off all those boxes too. The friends that she chooses to hang with checks off all of those boxes too. But guess who does not? The children she bore into the world, but that's none of my business. All right, so it goes on to talk about, like I said, your prominent families that own businesses, that intermarried with other well-to-do black people. Okay, I'm trying to get on down here. I'm trying to move it on forward, y'all, so we can get on out of here. All right, so I want to go here. It says members of the black elite have historically given it. Oh, no, I can't skip. I didn't skip too far. All right. Y'all, it's so good. It's hard to skip. It's hard to skip. That's why I need you to go ahead and get the book. Drop down the link in the description box and get your copy of your book, so we can all read this together. Then we can skip some parts and we can just highlight the parts that you want to talk about, or the parts that I really want to talk about. All right, so this one, let's go here. All right, so all right, members of the Black elite have historically given generously to charities like the Urban League and the United Negro College Fund, and to the NAACP. Like I said, charity work, baby. I can't be considered, I can't check off my box at church if I hadn't given to charity, okay? Given to those poor Black people. I can lift my chin a little higher because I did my due diligence. I gave to that community of those people over there. Okay, so And 98-year-old organization, NAACP is a 98-year-old organization that has its roots amongst this group. The irony is that while today most of these successful people will still write checks for the NAACP, they do not consider it part of their social circle in the way that they would have done before the 1960s. It's those people over there. We'll give to those people, but it's not a part of us. Those are not our kind of people. We'll see what Myrlie Evers can do with it. This is Medgar Evers' wife. We do know the history of Medgar Evers, civil rights leader, shot down in his own yard, because she has lots of class, but that NAACP is a bit too grassroots for people like us, explains a Chicago matron as she sits in the dining room of her large home in the city's Hyde Park neighborhood. Now, Hyde Park is considered a little less than now. We were just there. What was it, April of this year? Yeah, April, for the Bridgerton ball, and it was held in Hyde Park, and we were told that we need to hurry up and get out of there. Anywho, so the woman holds a graduate degree and belongs to several boards on elite Black organizations. The NAACP did wonderful things for us in the South, and up here too. I'm happy to give to them because they help all of us, but just don't find a whole lot of professional Blacks socializing among the NAACP. We've got our own groups, separate. Didn't we fight? Didn't our ancestors, didn't our generations before us fight to dismantle that separate but equal? Didn't we fight to desegregate so that we can get closer to white people? But then we're fighting hard to this day to separate from each other. It's backwards as all outdoors. I understand. What are we doing, folks? Why do we continue to divide ourselves? Why? We demonize our differences and no longer view each other as human. You just become some snooty Black lady who thinks she's better than me, and because she thinks that way, I bet you I can steal her man. That's the mindset and the mentality that we're operating under in these 2023, 24 years, because we have divided ourselves so far that he's just this naive, nerdy Black guy that I can draw down on and take him for everything that he got, everything at least that he got on him. Because we don't see each other as each other. Baby, you are me. I am you. We're no different. And especially when it comes to outside the doors of our community, we better know that we're all in this together. That the raw is held against all of us. Do you not recall the one drop rule? I'm just saying. All right, so as I'm going to do just a little bit more, y'all, and we're going to get out of here. But he goes on to write about the Greek organizations. But I have to point out what he states about the church. All right, so as a woman pulls out her family photo album, she points to herself, her parents, her husband, and her friends who hold membership in Alphas, AKAs, Deltas, Links, Drifters, Girlfriends, Boule, and Guardsmen. There are photos of gatherings in the Inkwell at Martha's Vineyard, relatives playing tennis at the summer home in Idlewild, Michigan. Photos from important Detroit wedding reception that included nearly 1,000 guests. And of course, snapshots from a family member's black tie debutante cotillion. I have a graduate's degree, and my friends have degrees from Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, and Meharry. Why would I be socializing with some caseworker or mailman who goes to NAACP events? I'd have such I'd have as much in common with them as a rich white person has with his gardener. Come again, say what? Who? Huh? Well, I heard you. I heard you. Let's pause for this mindset moment. This is the look I'm giving her, like, okay. At this point in the conversation, I stopped using words. At this point in the conversation, I stopped using words and let my body language speak to you. Because at this point in the conversation, I know you're foolish. I know you're foolish. I know you're stupid. I don't care how many degrees you got on your wall. You're foolish and you're stupid. You can have more degrees than a thermometer, and I'm still looking at you like you're foolish. Because at the end of the day, all we got in this world is each other. All this other stuff is just made up fallacies. It's social constructs. And if we cannot socialize with one another, individualism does not beat institutions. God said it ain't good for man to be alone. So I don't know why we're fighting to be exclusive so much. I don't know why we want to get over into these little islands off by ourselves, because it ain't good. It ain't good. It's not good for our maturation, baby. It's better to find things that we can agree upon and find in common with one another than it is for us to pick out little distinctions of differences for us to divide each other. A divided house cannot stand. You say, well, I don't want to be in the house with you. Well, you want to be in this little tiny shack by yourself. Because when you get over there by yourself, you are by yourself. You are open to the pickings. Oh, but she goes on, and it's because of these real or imagined differences that Black elite in every major city and suburb has its own churches as well. The Black upper class has the most often been associated with the Episcopal Church, says Reverend Harold T. Lewis, the author of Yet with the Steady Beat, the African American Struggle for Recognition in the Episcopal Church, director of Calvary Episcopal Church in Pittsburgh. Despite earlier affiliations with the Baptist and Methodist denominations and the larger numbers of Blacks who currently make up the congregations, the Black elite have often selected to be more formal, high Episcopal church or the Congregational church. I know this all too well because I used to be a choir director. And yes, it's a thing. It's a thing to be associated with the snooty churches that sit up just like those Protestant Puritan churches that I visited in Boston that still have those little short seats where first of all, you had to be thin. I don't see how any plus size person could sit on them seats. You had to be thin. You had to be, and it plays into all of these stereotypes that the general public uses in its caste system and class system. If only thing that you cannot do, well, nowadays you can change your color, you can change your race, you can bleach your skin, you can change your gender, you can change everything about yourself. Just like Mr. Lawrence admitted, you can go down there to that surgeon and do everything in your power to become what was considered the most elite. And the most elite was always a thin. You got to be thin, attractive, white male. Protestant white male. Then you need a pedigree. So, I mean, all of these things is what a lot of people in society today is racing to participate in. I'm not getting down with the get down. I'm not. I cannot. I'm not one of those girls. Thank God. Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Mama, for sheltering me. I'm not one of those girls that's gonna race to be in your club. These are habits that are basically what we know to be elementary behavior. You can't sit at my table. You can't sit at the cool with the cool kids. Those are these patterns that we are as adult emulating and operating in. Um, we didn't finish the entire chapter. I do want to read this portion. I mean, everything is so good that I don't want to skip anything, but I do want to read this because Lawrence goes back to talk about his grandmother. Okay, so when I recall rules of the group, this is talking about women's sororities. When I recall the rules of the group, I think of a remark I once heard a friend of my parents, okay, not his grandmother, a friend of my parents make after one afternoon when we were on my cousin's yacht in Long Island Sound. I had asked her about sororities when Miss Jenkins, not her real name, began explaining the distinctions between the group of people who join either the Deltas or AKAs and the very different group of college girls who might join the other sororities. See, they don't even name them. Those are the only two. Now, I'm an AKA, and these are quotations. Now, I'm an AKA, and the only other natural sorority for me would be the Deltas. The other sororities were just not a consideration. It's not that I'm looking down on them, but the fit have been right for me or them. They were a tad bit darker than us. And they really didn't come from our background. They were daughters of doctors, teachers, dentists. We were daughters of doctors, teachers, dentists, pharmacists, and such. They were doing good in their if their fathers were even Baptist preachers. Now, I don't know any other way to even be considered in joining a Black Divine Nine Greek organization if you're not at least enrolled into a college and you at least have a decent enough GPA, you at least have a certain amount of community service hours that you have volunteered yourself to give back to your community. That's the least for any one of these Divine Nine organizations. But Miss Jenkins was making her distinctions that, you know, these other sororities weren't even on the same level as her. If their fathers were even Baptist preachers. Remember, back to Mr. Lawrence's great grandmother, Baptist is considered beneath the elite. And I'm just gonna say, in Montgomery, the Baptists are the elite. Okay, anywho. Miss Jenkins stared off into the water for a moment. We just came from different worlds, and we weren't like-minded people. How, Sway? How did y'all come from different worlds and end up in the same place doing the same thing? How, Sway? And not be like-minded, because as far as I know, everybody that goes to a university, a college or a university, is there to attain an education that will afford them a better lifestyle. Now, I do understand that some people, parents, especially females, their parents are sending them there to get a spouse, but at the same time, you still had to enroll in some form of college. you still had to determine and declare some form of degree. So, how are your mindsets different? Let's pause for a mindset moment. We were not like minded people. And why spend time with people who aren't similar? Of course, they were all quite polite and well behaved. Now, mind you, insert white face here. Then I don't know where your mind went, but with this statement from Miss Jenkins, and I insert a white face and her voice, white voice for Miss Jenkins, all I can think of is the color purple. And Miss Celia said, "What you say?" No, Miss Celia, don't do it, Miss Celia. That's what I heard when I heard Miss Jenkins say they were all quite polite and well behaved. After all, we were at Spelman, one of the elite schools. And you still making your business to separate yourself from people who are the same gender, the same color and complexion, there for the same purpose of attaining an education. But for some reason, you want to make sure that it's known that we didn't have the same mind. Okay. All right. Well, bless the Lord. Hallelujah. There's more. And I want you to go ahead and grab your book, and we will read more on next week. Thursday next week. So go on to chapter number 2, which is Jack and Jill, the elite black kids are separate from the rest. Yes, they are, baby. Jack and Jill ain't nothing but pink and green in where I'm from, coming where I'm from. Ooh, I got my stories, baby. I got my stories about the Jack and Jill. But anywho, I have enjoyed you, and I hope you have enjoyed too. The book, once again, is called Our Kind of People. It's written by Lawrence Otis Graham. It is a national bestseller. I did explain to you before that there is a television show that has been made based off of this book. It's called Our Kind of People. It can be streamed, so go and search for that television show, Our Kind of People. Now, speaking of the classy base girls, if you have not already, drop down in the description box and go ahead and click that link to Eventbrite and get your tea for High Tea with the Alabama Church Girl, October 7th, 11 a.m. We will be having high tech tea, talking taboo topics with the Alabama Church Girl. Of course, we are going to look good in our fascinators. You can put on your gloves if you like. You can wear your heels or flats. It does not matter. Your dresses or your jeans. It really does not matter to me because I'm suchy much, but not as much. But the one thing that we will do, we will definitely get into all those taboo topics at our high tea. I cannot wait to have all the tea and the crumpets and talk all of the stuff and the things with the girlfriends. So please go ahead and get your tickets now. That's October 7th. We're only 8 days away. So go ahead and get your ticket today. Those tickets are $29. And if you buy 2 or more, you will receive a discount. All you need to do is use the discount code, all caps, Taboo T2. Taboo T2, the number 2. And I want to see your face in the place at the Gazebo Tea Room on October 7th, 11 a.m. for high tea with the Alabama Church Girl. All right, so that closes our night on tonight. Once again, I have enjoyed you. This has been extra long, but it's been extra good. Thank you for joining me for our read along of Our Kind of People. We'll see you back on next week, and hopefully Amazon has gotten you your book by then. All right, until then, please love God, love your families. All right, good night.